Every year, historians write thousands of books about war. They count the soldiers, they count the battles, they count the cost in human lives. But there is one question almost nobody ever thinks to ask. When bombs start falling and armies start moving, what happens to the animals? Not the horses soldiers ride, not the dogs trained to fight, the wild animals, the ones that didn't choose any of this, the deer in the forest where a battle is raging, the birds nesting in a city being bombed, the wolves living in land that just became a front line overnight. What actually happens to them? The answer is stranger, sadder, and more surprising than most people expect. Because war doesn't just affect the humans fighting it. It reshapes entire ecosystems. It drives some species to the edge of extinction. And here's the part almost nobody sees coming. It sometimes accidentally creates the most extraordinary wildlife sanctuaries on Earth. But to understand all of that, we first need to understand something important. Animals don't know what a war is. They have no concept of politics, borders, or armies. What they do know is noise, danger, and disruption. And war delivers all three on a scale that the natural world has never evolved to handle. Think about what a bombing raid actually sounds like to a wild animal. Military rifles fire at around 150 decibels. Bombs and artillery can reach far beyond that. Scientists studying noise pollution found that owls lose the ability to hear their prey when background noise reaches just 61 decibels. A busy road is about 70. A battlefield would be almost incomprehensible to any creature that hunts by sound or relies on hearing to survive. Animals with sensitive hearing, owls, deer, foxes, don't just get scared, they get effectively blinded. Their most important sense stops working. And it isn't only the noise. Wars tear apart the physical landscape. Forests get cleared. Rivers get contaminated. The chemical agents used in Vietnam, you may have heard of, Agent Orange, didn't just harm soldiers. They poisoned the soil for generations, working their way through fish and birds and up through the entire food chain. Long after the fighting ended, the land itself stayed toxic. A study published in the journal Nature in 2018 found something striking. Even a single year of conflict is enough to cause local wildlife populations to crash. Not just decline, crash. In Africa, researchers discovered that war tore through more than 70% of national parks on the continent. And the single most important factor in determining whether an animal population survived wasn't drought, wasn't habitat size. It was how frequently the fighting happened. Some species paid a price that can never be recovered. A study from 2013 suggested that the Barbary lion, once the most magnificent predator in North Africa, may have gone extinct when its last forest refuge was destroyed during the Algerian War in the late 1950s. An entire subspecies gone. Not because anyone targeted it, but because the forest it needed no longer existed when the fighting was over. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because war doesn't only destroy. Sometimes it does something almost accidental. Something that no conservationist would ever dare design on purpose. When World War II began, something remarkable happened at zoos across Europe. As Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, zookeepers in Warsaw began making a terrible decision. They started killing their own animals. Not out of cruelty, out of fear. Fear of what would happen if bombs destroyed the enclosures, and lions, tigers, and wolves disappeared into a city already descending into chaos. London did the same. In the first weeks of war, the London Zoo quietly put down dozens of animals, anacondas, wolves, a Siberian tiger, because the risk of them escaping into a bombed city was considered too dangerous to take. The Berlin Zoo survived the early years, but by the end of the war, it had been bombed 12 separate times. A single night of bombing in November 1943 killed 30% of the animals in less than 15 minutes. By the time Berlin fell, out of nearly 4,000 animals that had lived there before the war, fewer than 91 were still alive. That is the face of war that animals know. Not ideology, not strategy, just destruction arriving from the sky, with no warning and no explanation. And yet, there is another story. In 1953, the Korean War ended. A strip of land, roughly 2.5 miles wide and 150 miles long, was declared a buffer zone between North and South Korea. It was called the Demilitarized Zone, the DMZ. Landmines were buried across it, fences went up, armed soldiers patrolled the edges, and from that moment on, almost no human being set foot inside it. For more than 70 years, that land sat still. What happened next took scientists decades to fully appreciate. With humans gone, nature moved in, slowly at first, then completely. Today, the Korean DMZ is home to over 6,000 species of wildlife. Bears, otters, endangered cranes, wild cats, Manchurian trout swimming freely in rivers that elsewhere in Korea are heavily farmed and polluted. Over 100 of those species are classified as endangered elsewhere species that exist in that zone, precisely because humans have been forced to stay out. One researcher put it simply. Even if there is a lot of military activity, he said, nature can thrive here. He called it a symbol of hope. It is a deeply strange kind of hope. A wildlife sanctuary created entirely by accident, protected not by conservation law, but by landmines and armed guards. No one planned it. No government decided to set it aside for nature. It happened because war made a place too dangerous for people to enter, and nature filled the silence that followed. This is the paradox at the heart of war and wildlife. War is devastating for animals in the immediate zone of conflict. The noise, the chemicals, the habitat destruction, the collapse of anti-poaching patrols, all of it is catastrophic. And yet, in the long pause that sometimes follows fighting, when humans abandon land they once occupied, nature reclaims it faster than almost anyone expects. We have seen it elsewhere too. Around the site of the Chernobyl disaster, not a war, but a human catastrophe that emptied the land just the same, wolves, lynx, and wild horses now roam in numbers not seen in that region for a century. The absence of people, it turns out, can be more powerful for wildlife than the most ambitious conservation program ever designed. Which raises a question that is genuinely uncomfortable. What does it mean when some of the healthiest wildlife populations on Earth exist because of human conflict, not in spite of it? What does it say about how much space human beings normally take up? How completely we fill and manage and reshape every landscape we occupy? Animals didn't start any of the wars humans have fought. They had no say in the bombing of Berlin, no voice in the Korean ceasefire, no knowledge of the chemical compounds being sprayed across Vietnamese forests. They simply lived in the places where those things happened, and they paid the price, or sometimes, quietly, unexpectedly, found a strange kind of refuge in the wreckage we left behind. The history books will keep counting the human cost of every war ever fought. That is right and necessary. But somewhere alongside those numbers, there is another story. Quieter, without language or memory, or anyone left to tell it. The story of every creature that heard the bombs and didn't understand why, and somehow, in some places, kept living anyway.